Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Underground QA podcast, a podcast about quality assurance in the video game industry. My name is Chris, and my pronouns are he, him. So we have three fellow QA professionals joining us today, and I will let them introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ariel. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a test discipline manager at Bungie.
Hi, I'm Marcin, and my pronouns are he, him, and I'm software test project manager at Ubisoft.
Hey there, folks. I'm Leland. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a senior test discipline manager at Bungie as well.
All right, and before we get going, just a quick disclaimer that all individuals appearing on the podcast are not doing so as official representatives of their respective companies, and the opinions expressed here are their own. Next time I'll read it faster. All right, all right, friends. Hope you're all feeling well. So today, recently it's been an exciting time for QA, where there have been more full-time opportunities for entry-level employment in the QA discipline. So we felt that for this episode, we'd like to talk about interviewing for those positions. So what QA hiring managers tend to be looking for, at least our experiences with that, what you could potentially expect on an interview, and some pro tips that could help build your interviewing skills. So another disclaimer. So today we're not going to focus on resumes or cover letter building. We could save that for another episode. But if you really want some help with your resume or your cover letter, especially if you're going for a spot in the QA discipline, you should definitely check out our resume and reviews channel in our Underground QA Discord. There are plenty of people. It's very active where people are asking for feedback and getting some really, really good feedback and brushing up their resumes. I've seen a few success stories in there. So jump into our Discord and get into the resume and reviews channel. And if you're looking for some tips with helping with your resume and cover letter. But today we're going to focus mainly on the interview itself. So let's jump in, friends. Today's first lightning round. So what was a bad interview experience you had as a candidate? Like, what kind of mistakes do you think that you made and what you might have learned from them? Who would like to start?
I can go first.
All right, go for
it. I once interviewed for a internal position at a company I was working at, and I went into the interview feeling very prepared to talk about all my success stories and very unprepared to talk about my failures. So when I was asked to give an example of like how I had failed and learned from it, I did not have a good example. So I reached for the very first thing that came to my head, which was a terrible example, to the point that my manager later on said, "That was the example you came up with?" Very incredulous. So I, generally speaking, super good to prepare for interviews, but also be prepared to answer questions like, name a time when you really screwed up and how you made up for that or something like that. Those kinds of questions are definitely coming, and they are tough to answer if you haven't thought about them at all ahead of time.
I like it. I can go next. So I had an experience where I was applying at Bungie, actually, and on my resume, I was like, "Oh, it's a technical position. I should make sure I sound technical," even though I was not at the time.
Oh, that's fun.
And so I was like, "Well, I'll just say that I'm learning to code. Everyone codes in game dev, right?" And so, of course, the interviewer called me on that and was like, "Tell me about what you're coding. What are you learning? What can you do?" And I was like, absolutely nothing. I've opened the web page to Code Academy and I'm doing my best.
I'm doing the intro to Python.
Yeah. He was like, "Oh, what have you learned in that so far?" And I was like, "Nothing. I've literally started it."
Python exists.
I think I described it as aspirational. And he was like, "Okay, we should move on." So don't put something on your resume or your cover letter unless it's done true. You can actually show the impact of it.
Yeah, I can go next. I was going for a senior position, and I thought I'm 9 years experience in the industry. I can easily, crush the interview, and that's not how it went. With all those behavioral questions, I was repeating myself, and then the second part was technical because the job was a little bit also with automation. At some point, the interviewer gave up. He was, "Okay, you just stop coding, just go through what we would like to program into the thing," which was quite embarrassing. And obviously then they were like, "Well, we won't give you a senior. Maybe a middle will be good. How does it sound to you? So yes, be prepared, because even if you have 9 years of experience, interviewing is an art form in itself. So better to be prepared with examples.
Oh yeah,
but better examples than Ariel.
Yeah, I've definitely felt that before. Where they're like, "Oh, I've been doing this for so long, I should be able to breeze right through it," and then nope. I'll throw mine in. I did this. This is this cardinal sin, which I definitely wish I hadn't messed up. But I didn't spend enough time looking at the game that the company makes. I hadn't used it in a long time, and there were some very significant changes that had happened recently, and I was interviewing for the team that had implemented those changes. So they were like, "Oh, well, how would you go about testing this thing?" And because it was a virtual interview at the time, I could have it just, they were like, we'll just bring it up and walk through it. And it was honestly maybe the second time I had looked at it ever. So I was like stumbling through and really didn't have a lot of input of what I would actually do. And it didn't pan out. It was too bad, but that's fine. Everything's fine now. So I definitely learned, like, if you're going, like, regardless whether it's games or software, spend some time with the product that company make, product or products, especially if you know what team you're interviewing for. So that way, if they do ask those targeted questions, you can say like, all right, well, I've noticed this, or I feel this about it, or you can give them some valuable input like that. I'm still thoroughly embarrassed about that one.
You live and learn. Hopefully the learn part.
Seriously, yeah, that was the thing. It was definitely a learn. Like I knew my stuff about the products after that one. All right. Well, thank you, friends. Appreciate you sharing those insightful moments. Now, let's jump into the real meat of things. So we've all been hiring managers at some point. So let's start talking about what our value systems are with, like, trying to find candidates that apply. So let's kick it off with let's see. So what do we tend to look for in this hiring process? Leland, why don't you start us off? Like, what do you tend to look for?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to start with a weird one. I look for abstraction. I look for the ability for someone to be able to take information, technologies, like priorities, values, like skills, traits, all of those pieces. I look for them to be able to take those pieces and be able to translate them into new fields or new areas. So a great example of this was that I had it was like an ornithology research assistant, some sort of like thing like that, where it's like they were studying data patterns around birds. And I was like, well, this is not exactly games QA. But in their cover letter, they actually walked me through the process of, like, these are the processes I go through for doing that. Here's how it could work and apply to understanding data trends for games. And, like, we have to be able to measure the data itself and understand if the data is accurate too. And it was like, as he walked me through the story, I was like, oh, okay, I get it. It's just the same abstract skill. It's just in a different setting. And after like that, I started to understand, hey, these people aren't wasting time in another industry. They're taking the time there and using that to translate to this industry. So yeah, abstraction for me is now super important.
Yeah. So this kind of like goes a little further, like it touches on something we'll touch a little later about related experience. But yeah, that's an excellent thing. Oh man, that's really good. What else do you tend to look for? How about Marcin? What do you think?
I look for empathy. Like, we are mainly a support class. So yeah, the team won't go too much without our support. So we need to make sure that we emphasize with the poor programmers, developers that have to go through hardships of developing the game and being able to communicate with them properly and be a team player. So without empathy, I think in those usually ISTQB. They put like stupid examples of what not to say to your programmers. Like, they treat their code like a baby. Don't tell the baby that it's ugly. So
What?
Yes, don't tell the baby it's ugly. That's great.
Yeah,
Yes.
don't tell the parent that their baby is ugly. Even though, and if it goes further in that example, even it might be true, don't tell the parent that the baby is ugly. So I look for empathy because you talk with a lot of programmers. You sometimes the truth might be harsh, and you have to pick your battles and words properly, so you don't either offend them or sometimes if the release is very bad, or you'll have to say bad news to them. You know how to do it properly.
Yeah, exactly. And then Chelsea's jumping into the chat and like, yeah, using empathy is a key indicator. How do you tell a parent their baby's ugly without offending them? Like,
Yeah.
we're all humans with human feelings. It's good to understand that and take and take care when delivering that feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one thing I want to add on there too, which is like in empathy, there's this sense of not just the ability to like recognize it, but also the ability to communicate it from a sense of we're on the same team making the same thing together. And even though we have different perspectives, like our goal is to collaborate. And I found that to be a very like diffusing the scenario sort of approach where you're not coming at it as like, hey, you moron, you made this mistake, but it's like, hey, we both said we wanted the best version of this and it's not there right now because of this reason. How can we get closer to that together? I find that when we use that kind of language, when we use that kind of like coming alongside and supporting language, we tend to be more welcome in the room designing it the next time. Whereas if you only show up and throw tomatoes at it and you're like, your stuff sucks, like eventually you just get exited out of that room entirely, where they're like, who wants a naysayer when we're trying to dream? Like we're trying to do something fun and amazing to make games. And all you do is point out all the things wrong with it. Like, so we coach our people instead to think about saying yes, if like, hey, we could do this, but here are the ramifications, here are the qualifications of being able to support that. So I always look for a candidate that responds first with like, I want to validate how cool this idea is, while also understanding if it's possible, if it's sustainable, and so on.
I really like that phrasing of yes if, because that it reminds me of like the improv yes and. I mean, like, how can we build on this? But like, yes, if this happens, that's really, really cool.
We had someone who the other day said they want to meet excitement with excitement when it comes to talking to designers. I thought that was a really, really great phrase, right? Like if the designer is super excited about a terrible idea, you want to be like, oh, it's so awesome that you thought of this really cool thing. Now let's talk about the realistic parts of it. You know, like you start by saying, yes, good, you are awesome, but let's be realistic.
Yeah, because sometimes QA gets even associated with being the harbinger of death. Like everybody's like, yeah, we're going to do this. And then you come in and then basically the atmosphere goes dense because, okay, Marcin, what you going to tell us? Spit it out.
How are you going to kill my dreams today, Marcin?
Yeah.
This actually this shows up as a red flag in interviews where people think that the sole role of QA is to come in and break things. And so they'll show up in interviews and be like, I love to break things. I love to hurt engineers. And like they're getting like excited about these negative aspects. I've literally heard this. And I'm like, okay, I understand what you're trying to say, but like the only reason we break things is to make them better, not to hurt the people who made them. And so that comes up across as a red flag, is lacking that empathy, that they're like thrilled to get to tear down someone else's work. It's like that represents a lot of hard work and investment. You should respect that while also improving it.
Yeah.
And someone who wants to hurt other people is probably going to be successful at some point in that. So not someone you want on your team.
Yep.
Yeah, that sounds like someone else's lightning round learning moment. And Chelsea's pointing out in the chat, like it's already broken. Like the functionality is broken. We're just kind of saying, hey, this is broken. You should look at it.
Yeah, super true.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna jump down and ask, like, because we touched on it briefly with Leland's answer of experience. Like, so how much experience do we really want to expect? What's relevant experience? Well, actually, before I do that, Ariel, did you have something that you tend to look at with your hiring process?
I was going to say curiosity. That's the big thing for me. I've always looked for curiosity.
Oh, that's a really good one. Yes.
If people don't ask any like questions at all throughout the entire interview, like I want a candidate who responds to me asking a question by asking scoping questions. Like, what did you mean by that? Can you clarify this point here? I just want to make sure that we're aligned before I go off on some tangent and give you the wrong answer, right? People taking the time to ask those questions to make sure they're not making assumptions is super valuable. It also shows engagement. So like when I get to the end of an interview and I say, hey, do you have any questions for us? And if the answer is no, I don't have any questions, then like part of me is wondering, well, is this person like engaged? Are they not interested in Bungie, or are they not interested in what they do? Like, do they really not have like any questions, or is it that I just answered the ones they already had? Like, but generally speaking, yeah, it's super critical that they're at least invested enough to keep asking questions both in the interview itself and at the end of me and whoever else I'm interviewing them with.
No, that's excellent.
To search for that creativity, I usually ask people why games have bugs. to weed out if they are even looking at the industry from not only from the perspective, because QA missed it, which is always the best answer to give. But to search for those, okay, are they interested enough in the industry to notice patterns or notice the things like the company is big, like we have Blizzard, CD Projekt, Epic, all those big brands that are doing the games for 30 years, and then the release happens and it's full of bugs. Like why does it occur? And it's always interesting to see what answers they bring, aside from either it's QA's fault or something went wrong, and usually they have trouble explaining what went wrong exactly.
Yeah.
One last thing I wanted to add there is that like curiosity to me has like an inverted correlation with someone coming in feeling like they already know it all. And especially for these entry level roles, like one of the primary things I'm looking for is the recognition that while they do bring some talent, some skills, like the primary thing they bring is teachability. Like they're willing to be a sponge, willing to really soak up information. And the more curiosity that they display, like the higher chance they actually will have that. So yeah, I will 100% agree with that curiosity. Like it to me is one of those, like, I can probably teach this person anything because they're going to ask enough questions to get to that stage, which shows that they're humble enough to admit they don't know it all yet.
I love it. So what I'm curious about is how much experience is enough experience to really bring someone in? Like, do they need exceptional QA experience? What do we consider relevant experience? So Ariel, I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, so for full-time entry-level jobs, you don't necessarily have to have any QA-specific experience, but sometimes it can be super valuable to have relevant experience. Like going back to the example that Leland was talking about earlier, if you have done like a bunch of research and have some experience doing like data analysis, for example, that is very, very relevant. And so like I would look for that kind of thing, but that you don't necessarily have to have that, but you do need something to make your resume stand out. Because if I am looking at literally 1,000 different applications, right? Like what is it about your application that is going to like make it stand out and make me pull you in for an interview, right? So that is something that I think that you have to think about and do very deliberately if you don't have any experience, because you have to find a way to make up for that. Usually people do it in a cover letter where they can talk about how the experience they do have actually is relevant to QA and somehow, and they can draw those lines and correlations and really kind of show the value of the experience they have.
Yeah, it's not about the industry experience, it's about what skills do you bring to the table.
Yeah, exactly.
I had to scale up the team very quickly, so I was very desperate for anybody that can help with testing the Ubisoft Connect. And I had everybody. I had teachers. I had an embassy worker, translators. Probably the best example, which was one of the good QA that basically rose very quickly to an experienced tester. Was his previous experience. He had zero previous experience in QA or anything connected to games. His last job was a waiter on a cruise ship.
Oh,
yeah,
a waiter
problem
on
solver.
a cruise ship.
Problem solver, yeah.
yeah, problem solver. Yeah. So doesn't matter really from where we come from. It's the best thing is what you can bring to the table. Is it good enough for the team and doesn't bring value to the team? And problem solving, being creative, or being a team player is what matters. Doesn't require you to really break games or whatever.
Exactly. All of these qualities that you all are talking about right now, you can display in other areas. Like, there are those fabled stories of people who were WoW Guild officers, and they use that experience to explain how they would be good for certain types of work, because there's the skill sets in there that you need that transfer in there, even though it's not industry experience. Or like maybe the company you work for has a specific type of software that they make. To use a personal anecdote, my first game industry experience was at a company that made music games. I was a music major in college. I could play the game really well and could play the instruments for real. So it was just like, hey, maybe I should work at your company. And they were like, yeah, maybe you should. So it worked. So like, you don't have to have that exact like industry. Like, I've been in games, take me in, I know what I'm doing. You can always bring it out from someplace else. Leland, do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add on to that is just the sense of, for me, it's a lot less about how much experience you have versus how much experience you got out of the experiences you've had. Because I've had 10-year QA vets who have failed entry-level positions for me where they just did not learn the pieces that would actually be associated with it. Like they're like, oh, I was told to do this, and so I did it. So they missed a lot of like critical thinking and strategic planning, all those pieces. And on the other hand, like we've hired, folks right out of college who were able to say like, hey, I was making a game project with my friends, and so I ran into all these problems from the game development side. And that's more experience than a lot of like someone that has 10 years in QA somewhere else who has never done that, like developer side problems, and being able to develop that empathy, as Marcin called out. Like, so I think it's really more about like, what are the opportunities realistically in front of you? Like, can you make a game with friends? Could you try and make a board game with friends? Like, you'll run into design problems and balance bugs and pieces like that, and you could get a ton of experience out of something accessible in your living room like that other people have not gotten out of their own like professional job. So I always try to think about that, because I think it means that Games QA feels more accessible. I'm originally from Georgia, and it was like there was not a lot of game development options in my small carpet making town in Georgia. But when I was like first talking to one of the test directors at Bungie and talking about like, I really want to get into this, he was asking me like, well, how do you test now? And I was like, oh gosh, like that's a great question. But then I immediately thought to like, well, I run a Minecraft server, and Minecraft servers break. Like, that's just what they do. And like, let me talk about trying to like chase down this memory leak that I was trying to do, and how I was going through debug logs, and I was analyzing like different things that players were doing in game to try and see if there was some root cause analysis I could track. And I tied that back to like, I used to be a psychology major, and like that one of our goals there is to understand the origin of things and try to like gather all of the data points that might point us in a direction. And it was like, the more I talked about it and look back now, the more I realized like, oh, I was using the experience I had that was very different from Games QA to say like, no, these are things that could be useful within this field. So I encourage people to look around in their lives and think about like, how could they test today? Like, that could be something that becomes relevant information in an interview later.
No, that's excellent. I think that really sums up a lot of what we've been getting here. This has been a great point here. And a lot of this, like Marcin had mentioned, is that you can, oh no, I'm sorry. It was like Marcin, I think also Ariel, that this can all be summed up on the cover letter. You can just say, hey, here's how this experience translates really well into this position that I want to get into, regardless of how much, even though I have never worked in games before.
Yeah, I think the cover letter is a really awesome opportunity to demonstrate the impact you've had in previous roles that people often miss on their resume, because their resume, they'll just put like the line items of all the different things that they've actually like their job responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
They basically copied the ad for the job they had and pasted it into the resume, right? There is not a lot of value in assessing a candidate in that outside of what have their job responsibilities been. But I'm always looking for what has their impact been. What did they really nail or do successfully, or what kind of like how were they worth the money to that company, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when people talk about that in the cover letter, I did this really amazing thing. It had this X, Y, and Z impact.
Mm-hmm.
That is awesome. Like, so yeah, I'm always looking for demonstrated impact in applications.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. So let's move on to, all right, we've looked at the candidates. We've talked about like what our value systems are when we're trying to find people to bring in for interviews. So now we've brought people into the interviews. So what kind of questions do you think the people should be kind of expect? Like, what are like some of the ones that you use? What might be some classics that we've experienced that we should probably have people prepare for? Who wants to jump in with that one?
I think the obvious one is the how would you test XYZ, like the pen, the chair,
Classic.
Whatever. And probably once
I was asked a stapler once. Yep.
Anything that is in the room, around the room, or the most common objects in your life. But then if you go into more specified roles, like for art QA or audio QA, whatever, they're gonna ask you not necessarily for any object in the room. But more about okay, you're in our game, and how you're gonna test the audio component, or this for level design QA, how you're gonna test that the chair is properly done, or for art QA, how you're gonna go about checking the whole environment around you. So be prepared for those, definitely.
So I do have a question on this a little bit, especially because we've all been there. I've had my two favorites I've been asked have been like a stapler and a vending machine. But like, what are we looking for when we ask someone this question?
So going back to my answer earlier in terms of curiosity, I want someone who's going to ask questions to clarify what it is I'm asking them to do. So if I ask them, how are you going to test a calculator? If they just start diving right into test cases without telling me, like without asking, well, what kind of calculator is it? Is it a graphing calculator? Is it like a calculator on my phone? Or if they don't like get any kind of clarification at the start and they just dive right in, like that is a potential like yellow flag that they did not like even try to understand the scenario before they jumped in, and that means that there's a good chance that they'll do that in the job too, and that is a necessary part of being a good tester, is asking questions and finding out, what is this supposed to do, right? What am I supposed to be looking? What is the scope of the test? Like, is there someone else testing the calculator that they're testing the physical components of it, and I need to test the software component of it or the firmware of it? Like, there's so many questions you can dive into. So leaping straight to giving an answer instead of actually asking any questions is dangerous.
Yeah, the whole process of the candidate. So we also have limited time, so you cannot just spend 30 minutes asking the interviewer about the calculator. You have to choose wisely. And how you dissect so what are the next steps? You have either limited time or limited information. So how you go from the beginning to the end, so the interviewer is happy with your report, or however you present your solution to him.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is also just the sense of establishing enough context to be able to ask the right next questions too. It's often if you just throw a carpet bomb of questions at the beginning, you may not actually be getting enough information back to ask more intelligent ones or more informed ones. But then the thing for me is I'm always trying to understand then the strategy of their approach and understanding its prioritization surrounding around the impact of the things they're trying to measure. So if we were measuring a microwave and the number one thing they wanted to check was whether or not a screw thread on the bottom of the microwave was perfectly tight. It's the sort of thing where I was hey, why did you start here? I'm starting to ask questions around what was your approach? What's your goal? If I told you the intent of this was for people to open the door and put in things and heat them up, and you were checking the screws, it's that's technically a part of the product, but it makes me wonder whether or not you get the big picture, whether or not you do understand the intent of the thing. And so I can actually glean a lot from the organization of your approach. You're I want to start at the biggest, most important things, the golden path, the happy path, whatever you want to call it. We have a bunch of industry terms for it, but normal outside of industry people can still get that idea of it's supposed to heat stuff. So I'm going to test some heating stuff, not the screws underneath. So it's not that those are necessarily parts we don't want to test. Yeah, sure, it could fall apart later. But if you start there, then I start to question why does that matter so much to you compared to these other areas? Did you not hear me say what matters to me? That you're supposed to be digesting this information and then applying it rapidly and synthesizing why this is important, not just going, well, I care about screws because maybe I'm a contractor over in this area and I do this work. And it's no, I told you this part's important. Focus on that part.
Yeah. And that part that you start with, that you're mentioning, Leland, with the overall functionality of what it is that you're testing, could lead you to, hey, maybe there's a screw loose somewhere, right. But you got to start.
Yeah, it rattles when it is microwaving. And you're why would it be rattling? Well, the screw threads are loose.
Where is it rattling? And then that'll bring you down to the spot you need to get to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Unless that's a snake microwave, then it's fine.
Yeah, I think there's often people kind of assume there's an unlimited amount of time to do whatever the testing is, so they're just going to cover all of it, and it's that is never true. You never have an unlimited amount of time. There's always a timeline, so you have to think in terms of how am I going to make the most of the time that I have in order to do the testing.
Yeah, and one thing I'll call it that's important there is talking out loud about why you're doing all of these pieces is one of the things I always hammer. If they just say we don't have time, I'm sorry, we have some time, but we don't have infinite time. Tell me more about what you believe we're doing here, because hearing them say, I know we have limited time, so I want to focus my work on the things that matter most and cover the most in that time. Oh my gosh, we're green flags everywhere. Let's go. Which is an amazing
let's
candidate.
do this.
Yeah.
Excellent. So what else would we want to potentially ask for interview questions? I think a pretty blatant one would be everything that's in the job rec. It's what you're actually interviewing for, maybe.
Yeah, my cheat sheet here is go through their job rec, go through the description for every single bullet, be able to respond to something you have done and have the impact, as Ariel mentioned earlier, show what you've done in that area responds directly to that bullet. If they're a decent interviewer and they're focused on the stuff that they said they're going to focus on, it's basically the answers to the quiz. Do not ignore those pieces. Do not just talk about your job and why it was cool. Focus on that because that's what they're trying to hire.
Yeah.
That's an excellent point. That's really good. And then another one would be everything on your resume, kind of going back to what Leland mentioning, oh yeah,
it's all fair game.
Looking in the coding, are you, pal? Let's talk about that.
Tell us more.
I know in a few interviews, I love to look at people's resume and really try and understand, where did they come from? What is this experience that you pulled in? Tell me about this part here. This really intrigued me, and I want to know how it translates here to what you're applying for.
Especially if you're like articulating a success, right? Like, oh, I did this really awesome thing over here, and then you ask them about it, and they're like, oh yeah, I don't even remember what that was. That job was like 3 years ago. I can't remember. Like, you have to be able to answer like specific questions about the specific successes you call out on your resume too.
Yeah, cover letter is also fair game, right? In the same, because usually in cover letter they do the sin of I love your studio, I love your games, I always play them since childhood, and then you ask them, okay, how about this game? And they're like, well, last time I played it 10 years ago, so my memory is fuzzy. And like, you try to sugarcoat me there.
My favorite example of that is when people have cover letters with the wrong developer at the top.
Yes.
Dear Ubisoft, I love your games. And I'm like, I do too. However, we're Bungie.
Yeah. I have sent that before because you have that template and I didn't tweak that one piece.
Or the wrong position. I am applying for the software developer position. And you're just like,
I love design.
Which is a very red flag for a QA. At least check.
Always wanted to be in design. Okay. One other thing on resume that I think is super fair game is if you put down that you've done any projects, you should be able to speak about them and like correlate them to QA skills. So an example of this is that I've had students that we're interviewing. Like, we love interviewing students because we really want that early in career. Like, we're getting someone who is essentially a blank slate with a ton of potential. It is an amazing opportunity for us. But I've asked questions like, tell me a little bit more about this, game project that you made. Like, as you were both developer and, writing code and designing and testing all at the same time, like what did you learn about, working across the aisle or something? Or what did you learn about like how bugs are popping up based on how you designed something? How could you start to think about this more preventatively? And they're like, I've never had anyone ask me about that project. Honestly, I just tested it. And you're like, okay, but tell me more, please. I'm begging you to tell me more. And they can't. And it's like, yeah, if you made it, you should be thinking critically about the work that you've done, not just professionally, but anything you put on your resume, you should have thought critically about and be able to dig deeper into and communicate, as Ariel said earlier, why it matters, like what the impact of that work was. Like, think that nothing you have done has been a waste. Try to use all of it. But in order to do that, you have to step in and like ask yourself questions you might expect to hear, like, what bugs did you run into while making this project? Okay, start talking. Like, you should have something there.
There will be a lot of situational questions. So, have you ever had a situation X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
And what did you do? How did it impact you or others? And especially those around teamwork and conflict management, because usually we are at the thick of teamwork and conflict management. So, I think the most popular is what if you submit a bug and then the developer says won't fix by design. What do you do then?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And what if
burn down their house? No.
There we go. So then we go back to
Call them a baby.
empathy and the ugly babies. Let's throw arson in there.
God.
Usually the answer I get is either they accept their fate, which is kind of a red flag. They're like, well, he's the developer, so what do I know? Or they're like, no, I'm a QA. They should listen to, because it's in the requirement. And I was like, oh, you sweet summer child. Like, if you start pointing them to the design, like there should be a design doc. And I'm like, yes, usually there are design docs, obviously, and then they're very outdated, and they will. Yeah. So you have to. It's very interesting how they either assume dominance or be submissive.
So I want to bring this up from the chat. Chelsea, I love that you're in this episode without being in this episode. But you're bringing up a really cool bit of advice that I can relate to, which is you have an interview notebook full of stories and strengths and examples of how you illustrated company values. And this helps a lot too if you can have, because these situational questions like Marcin is talking about tend to show up pretty frequently. Like, how do you deal with this type of like difficult situation? So having those anecdotes and stories ready to go for those types of questions that tend to be pretty boilerplate is going to make interviewing so much better. It took me failing multiple interviews to finally find the right anecdotes that I knew I needed to hit for these questions and be like, oh yeah, I had this thing. There was this project I worked on. Here's that situation. Here's how I handled it. And picking out those versions that show the best iteration of yourself, like, really helps make the interview a lot easier.
Yeah.
Especially for middle or seniors, like sometimes even interviewers will have like a grid of each of examples, and then mark if you had that experience and how did you handle it. Because if you don't have enough experience to tell, like I had with my awesome interview when I didn't come prepared with enough examples, they will be like, well, he didn't experience this, he didn't experience this. Is he really a senior if he didn't experience those things? So be prepared with those anecdotes.
Yeah.
Yep. And on the flip side of that, don't lie. Don't pretend like you have. This is something that I think is like, you want to have met all of the things and you don't quite, and like it's better to stretch an example and say, I think I can abstract this and find something that is close to it. If you try to actually lie about a full experience, like you're just making the whole thing up, it's super obvious. I don't know how to say it nicely, but like you won't get away with it. It will not fool anyone but the worst interviewers, and you really don't want to be at that company if they're putting those people in their interviewing slots. Like it's just not a good idea. Most of the people doing these have done dozens, if not hundreds, of these kinds of interviews, or have worked with the kinds of people who will do that work for years and years, and they'll be able to spot the like, you're just not making a lot of sense, or you're like your priorities are all out of whack here. It's like super obvious you haven't actually done this, or you just like read this on Google. It's great to do that learning, but be honest about your actual level of experience and talk about like why you believe the level of learning you have sets you up as a foundation to build on top of. But don't say you've got a fully constructed building there already and you've been through this a bunch of times. If you haven't, it will be pretty obvious.
Especially for an entry-level QA position, right? Like we're expecting that you are going to come in with some holes that will need to get plugged, right? But
yeah, I've had people say that like, I've done a bunch of play tests, so I've been a QA tester for 10 years. And you're like, you've been in some betas, but unless you were thinking about that from a QA perspective, you've been a player for 10 years. Like you have to do more than just say you've done it. Like tell me more why. It could be, maybe, like there may be something there.
Yeah,
Marcin, you
lying is a big no. It's a big red flag. Don't lie.
Huge red flag.
Yeah. Another bit is for those more experienced people, the industry, as big as it is also very tiny. So if you're talking about what you did on a project, chances are the person you're interviewing with might know someone who worked on that project or might have worked on that project themselves.
Especially if they're at a big company, like big companies collect people from all over the place. So it's very easy to like potentially like follow up on people and be like, hey, did you work with this person on this project if you want to? So yeah, don't lie. Just don't lie. It's
please don't.
Not going to help.
Just be honest. It's okay. We'd rather you be honest.
Yeah, and the industry is super small. Like you cannot get away with saying stupid stuff about your projects. Like there's probably from the industry. How it's called the bacon guy. The 6 degrees of
Kevin Bacon.
Yeah. This is the bacon guy. This is the best example I've ever heard. I love it. Oh my gosh, I'm stealing this, Marcin. Fantastic.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And probably for industry it's even smaller. Like probably it's like 3 degrees, 2 degrees, and you never know.
It's so tiny. And again, illustrating Ariel's point, especially with the larger companies that end up pulling in from those other places,
right?
You make those connections even more. I mean, like, oh yeah, I know someone who used to work there. Oh, we used to work there together. It's oof. So yeah, moral of the story, like Leland said, don't lie. All right. Are there any other potential interview questions that you all tend to use or that people should expect? I think we hit a pretty good smattering. Oh, yes.
Keep going.
Dozens.
We could keep going an entire episode of just interview questions. But let's... go ahead.
Yeah, probably the ones that usually people overlook is I don't know how you guys, but I usually ask about their hobbies or what they do in their free time or what they're passionate about. And usually people forget about thinking about those things.
That's interesting.
And for me, it's super important to know that they have the passion or they are psyched about something. So then I hire people that are passionate.
So are you just looking for like some level of passion at all, or are you looking for like them applying QA skills in their hobbies?
Kind of both, but mostly passion, just to make sure that I'm hiring a person that is interesting and if he's probably if he's passionate about his cooking or about anything in his life, then probably he's also passionate about other things. It's not like, I do things because I like them. I schedule 2 hours of fun every day. Like they
scheduled mandatory fun.
Yeah. So they
Where
bring
are
something.
You finding these candidates, Marcin?
That was
when
a robot.
You have to hire 50 people.
You were talking to a machine learning candidate.
Oh,
No, this is a good point, because we do start this off in our interviews. We actually do ask, like, hey, what kind of games are you enjoying right now? And part of that is to give them a chance just to speak about something they love and help make them comfortable. And, we're trying to develop an atmosphere in which it's going to be a fun discussion, rather than like, drill sergeants from the army being like, this is what you got to do. Tell me these things. Like, that's not very conducive to the kind of environment. Once they were hired, they're going to be in a fun environment where they're talking with a manager who's supporting them. So we don't really get anything out of that. So we try to develop this in the same way. But one of the reasons I look for just like that sense of passion at all is like, ultimately we're humans working with other humans to make games. And so if there's not a human element of like, I want to be doing this, then that scares me a little bit. Like if they're like, honestly, like I had a friend tell me I should get into QA and I'm just kind of checking it out. We'll see. It's not that they can't be a great person. It just must be a little more on edge, because now I'm like, well, did they tell you this because we're the, the doorstep of the industry? Like, do you actually care about what we're going to be doing here? Because if you want to go do design, just go do design. Like, that's okay. We don't have like fears around that. But what we don't want to do is waste your time and ours. Like, we don't want you to be disengaged because, as Marcin called out, like you just don't care at all. Like, I do need to see some level of connection to the work and to the people doing the work. Otherwise, I get a little bit concerned.
Yeah, I think this also kind of shows people having an ability, like if they have hobbies and interests outside of work, it shows they have a work-life balance, that they are able to kind of walk away and be themselves and be a human and say, all right, I like to go and do hiking and go outside, and I like to hang out with people. I love craft beer. I like to talk about other things. They're more, I feel like they're more apt to like show like, okay, I'm done with work for the day. Talk to you tomorrow, unless it is a blazing fire. And then at that point, it better be really bad. And I like to be able to see that. Ariel, I'm sorry. Did I cut you off?
No, you didn't.
Okay.
So one question that we ask a lot is why test? Why do you want to get into test? And that is a huge question. And a really bad version of the answer to that is I heard it was a good stepping stone, and that is my only interest in it. That is the sole value I place on test. That is a terrible answer, because we want to understand that you have some interest or passion for test itself, even if it's not your end goal, right? It doesn't have to be the place that you're going to stop, but that is where you're starting, and your interest needs to be more than just, this is my only way into the door, right?
This is my valley of death to get to the promised land. I have to suffer through tests until you'll allow me in design or whatever. And it's like, that's not what we're looking for.
Yeah. So being able to talk about like what is it about test that interests you, right? Like, are you interested in solving problems or learning more about game development? Like, that can be a great answer. Like, I heard that test is a great place to learn about game development. I want to learn more about that because I get exposed to a ton of different like areas of development. I'm going to work with designers and artists and programmers. So there's lots of opportunities to learn. That can be a good answer.
Yeah, and I don't mind if people say they fell into it. Like they were like, I didn't intend to start here, but I just kind of stumbled upon it. But what it's about is like the value they find while they're there. And they're like, but now I get, like as you called out, like I get this perspective of all of these different disciplines at once. And I love that. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So let's flip the tables a little bit here. So I think it was mentioned earlier, or Ariel mentioned people asking questions at the end of the interview. So what are some good potential questions for candidates that they should be asking about when the interviewers say, hey, do you have any questions for us?
Oh, I have a favorite, which is just anything focused on a negative aspect of the company to understand, like, what's hard here, or like what's something that test currently struggles with, or like what have you been failing recently on and you're trying to improve on. Just some sense of asking for vulnerability from the interviewer to say, we're not perfect, we're growing. This is why we want to hire people like you to help us get better at this thing. If you're asking those questions and the only thing they have are positives, that's a pretty big red flag as a candidate, to be like, this company or this interviewer, like they're not aware of their flaws. They're not aware that they're growing. They're not aware that like we all need to be learning and growing the whole time. That's like, you probably don't want to partner with them because they're not going to look at you as a learning, growing person as well. They're just saying like, you either need to be perfect or you're not welcome here. And it's just, no, don't do it.
Just be careful with the salt.
Yeah, it's a balance, right? And honestly, like Marcin, this is something you called out earlier with like the empathy thing as well. It's like, or the lying thing. Like, it's like you always are trying to find a balance between being passionate but not being too passionate, like being honest but not so honest as Ariel called out. Like, you're calling out something that's a little too like personal or something when you're giving an example. Like there's a balance in all of these things. Like you're not here to attack the company. The interviewer's not there to like say that the company is the worst thing they've ever worked at. Like there's all sorts of balance in this equation. And so be thinking about like, where am I on this spectrum? Am I swinging the pendulum too far in any of these answers? I had this happen in an interview where they asked me like, tell us about a time you failed and grew from it. And I went way too raw and way too deep of like this like, huge emotional thing for me. And it was with someone from HR. And afterwards they reached out and they were like, hey, I really appreciate your honesty and vulnerability, but you should know that like, that was pretty deep and like maybe not in an interview sort of situation, like maybe, with a beer after work or something, but like that was a little too deep. So like just for future reference, like, maybe pull up a little more balanced in how deep to go. So yeah.
Culture and values are good questions. So make sure that because it's always a two-way street. It's not only we hiring you and want to know you. It's also about you. Do you want to work for that company? So make sure that you ask and make sure you're aligned on values. And if the culture of the team or the company is something that resonates with you, because if you're going to come to a company that doesn't necessarily mirror your values, then you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like you could probably even ask the recruiter for the position, like, hey, can I see like a list of the company's like top values or their mission statement or something like that. But another approach you could take is when you're talking to the interviewers, you could ask them which of the company's values is their favorite and why, or which they think is most important and why. Because then you'll get a little bit more context for how those are being applied.
Another thing I definitely think is super valuable is to just ask, what's their favorite thing about the role? Like why is this something you're excited about? Like why are you excited to hire someone in here? In fact, if you can tie that even in as a candidate to like, what's the skill that you think someone in this role needs most to succeed? I've always liked that question because it communicates a teachability. It's like, hey, if I were in this role, what would I struggle most at? Like, what do I need to be working on? That tells me immediately, it's like, not only do they want to understand how to do the role better, which is a great fit, not only do I get the opportunity to talk about why it's a tough role and why we're trying to fill it and what their like agency and opportunity they would have to have an impact in it. But now I'm also understanding that as an interviewer, like this person cares about learning, they care about pursuing it, not proactively, right? Not me forcing them to do it, but saying like, if I wanted to learn now, if I could go back and practice like at home for this role, what should I be digging into? Like it nails so many things at once. I love that question.
Yeah.
No, that's
I think
good.
it's super valuable to understand why is this company hiring? Like what problem are they trying to solve? Are they shorthanded on a specific team? Are they looking for a new expertise? Like what is it that you need me to solve, and how can I best do that? It's a great place to poke.
Yep. Yeah, that makes total sense.
There's some good ones coming in on the chat here. I really like this one. Is how are you improving the team? What's your long-term ideas for improvement? So this showing like what are we doing to grow the team and the people on our team to help make things better? Is like, how does this go beyond just like filling this role? And I think that could answer questions for the person like, how am I going to grow? Like if you're looking at growing the team, I get to be part of that if I'm on this team. So what is your plan going forward? What are we looking to do here?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite times to communicate. Like, hey, we're hiring you to do the job, but actually we're also hiring you to improve how the job is done. Like we're actually hiring you to improve the test department itself at Bungie, not just like you're not checking boxes here. You're asking, why are the boxes here? Like, is this the best place to have these boxes? Like that's exciting to me. And so if an interviewer responds with like, hey, we're going to give you a checklist to run through, there's probably actually more behind that, and it's worth digging into. Like what's the amount of agency I have in this position to like suggest change? Not from like I want to change the balance of the game design. Like, sure, everyone cares about those pieces, but for the processes themselves, like how do I get to affect the ecosystem I am supposed to support? Is a really good way to be thinking about grilling the interviewer to make sure that they're thinking about it. Because if they say you're not, we're going to put you in a digital warehouse and you're going to fill boxes, like that. Yeah, maybe that's a good start to the industry. Like I won't say that's not a good job in and of itself, but it's probably a reduced agency amount of control you have over the environment itself.
No, that's excellent.
I also want to say that I think it's super valuable to remember who you're asking the questions of, because there's like certain questions that are great questions for asking interviewers, and then there's questions that you should really ask the recruiter, who can like answer, like the more like technical questions about like benefits and stuff like that. Like the person who's interviewing you might not know anything about what your benefit situation is going to be. So bearing in mind like who are you asking like is super important when you're asking those questions, because maybe you can shoot those questions over to the recruiter in an email instead of like asking something that has a very specific and correct answer of an interviewer who's better for asking more open-ended questions like what how can I help in this role type stuff.
People don't utilize enough the using email to ask questions. Like you always get that opportunity, write us an email with all the questions, ask the most important questions you want from the interview at that moment, and then the rest during the email.
Yeah, the worst I've had there was someone asking a deep like lore related question. It was like, not only can I not communicate this via NDA, but also I have no idea. Like I don't play the game enough to be able to answer that level of depth. Like that's insane. So
yeah.
I'm glad you appreciate our game so much.
Passion, but also weird you asked that.
Leland, what is your light level?
I don't remember right now. Like it's not a good question. All right, so I want to do a bookend this episode a bit with another lightning round. So we're gonna go around. I want to start with Ariel. What can someone do in order to prepare for an interview?
If they have a free game, go play it. If they don't have a free game, also like just playing it. But like having some kind of hands-on knowledge of the product that they're selling and making is super valuable. If they have any released games, play them. If you can't afford to play the game, go watch people play them on Twitch or something. Watch some YouTube videos that talk about like how the game works. Maybe watch a review for the game or something like that. But being familiar with the content of that the company produces is super valuable, because then you will be able to give better context specific answers to the questions that they're asking. And it's very likely that the products that they make are going to come up at some point in an interview. So just being able to actually speak to them is super valuable. Plus, if the game is free, like there's no excuse not to go to it as far as I'm concerned. Like jump in and play through the tutorial, so you at least have a vague idea of what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, exactly. And I really like your point about videos, because even with free games, if it's a PC only game and your PC's junk, like you're not going to be able to play it. So grab some Let's Play videos, check out a Twitch stream, understand what it is that you're getting into and the product that this company puts together. Yeah,
the goal is not specifically like hands-on experience with the product, but some kind of context-specific knowledge of the product and like how that will relate to what you're going to do, right? Because if you're going to apply for a job where you'll be testing a specific game, it's really helpful to know at least a little bit about it before you go into the interview.
So, Marcin, how about you?
I will expand Ariel's points. Do your research. So not only play the game, but maybe see what's the company structure like. What is their portfolio of games? What
maybe
is
look
the
at their
position
website.
about? Especially if it's a very specialized position like audio QA or level design QA or whatever. What is level design about? What audio QA does? So when you go into that job interview, you know what is expected from you, and then once they start asking those more specific questions, you at least have context of what it's about. And I have in my test, I have information. I ask about can you find the bug, and then to whom you would assign it to. And usually the people are like doing like general statements to the backend department or from the department. And I'm like, you can literally go to any Ubisoft game and type credits, and you'll get the company structure.
Sure.
So basic research is fundamental.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. How about you, Leland?
I think I'm going to go, like Ariel mentioned impact and being able to actually like represent why the work you did earlier matters. So I'm going to skip over that one, even though it is crucial. But the other one that I was thinking of that is like something I forget really easily is make sure you're in a comfortable environment when you're doing an interview. I have interviewed people that just weren't prepared to talk for an hour sort of thing. Like It's not that they couldn't, it's just they weren't ready to at that moment. Their environment wasn't supporting it, or it was causing them anxiety the entire time. So I had someone that had like a parakeet right beside the computer and it was loud. And I don't mind that they have pets. I love they have pets. I always get to ask like pet names. A super fun part of interviewing remotely, but they were stressed the whole time and apologizing over and over. I'm so sorry about the bird. So sorry about the bird. It's like, you could have moved the bird. Like you own the house or you're in this apartment. Like you can do things there to make yourself more comfortable. You can have on, comfortable shoes, set the temperature so you're not sweating the whole time. Like there's just a bunch of small things there, close the windows, close the door, keep a pet out, keep children out or something. Like give yourself the best environment to represent your best self and not be distracted and show something that's like, I just couldn't come up with an answer because my mind was working on why is my parakeet so loud? Like that's tough. That's really tough. It's already tough. It's already going to be stressful. Try and keep as much control as you can.
Yeah, definitely. And that can be really tough, especially because some dev studios will have those gauntlet interviews where you're going to be going through, like, you're not just talking to a couple people for 1 hour. You're talking to multiple sets of a couple people for over multiple hours in a row. Yep. So having a safe space that you feel comfortable and calm and more like your best self can really, really help. That's a great point.
And don't be afraid to ask, as you start an interview, like, can I use the restroom really quick? Could I grab some water? I had people feel like they couldn't, and that would be like received poorly, and then it just distracted them clearly over the next 2 hours, where their throat was getting really raw and they wouldn't go get water. And I was just like, you can be a human. We're just like, we know you still have to live while you do this interview. It's okay.
Yeah. Especially with those gauntlets. It's like, yo, are you okay? Do you need a minute? Oh, definitely. No, I think mine would go back to some of the points that were coming up in the chat about put together a notebook. I think, what was it? Who put it that way? Chelsea and also and Sarah also said like a win book. I liked how Sarah put it that way, of just like things that you've worked on. So you have that all to reference. You can hit those situational questions that always come up and practice them a bit. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Like make sure to like walk through like, how do I want to phrase this? This can go back to how Leland mentioned. I think it was like you getting really raw about the situation, sharing a little too much info.
Yep.
How do you reel it in? If you have that example of, I worked with this very difficult person on my development team, you don't want to go in and be like, oh, this dude, and you just give you such a hard time, but I got the last laugh. Like, sure, I'm sure you did, and we can talk about it. Like later on, like over a couple sodas or something, but like not during the interview. Oh my goodness! Like
that's
practice
actually.
It. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say, Chris, that's a great example because I had someone a while back who gave a great response to how they would respond to that kind of situation, and everything was perfect there. And somewhere along the way, they threw in like devs don't really know what they're doing, and they kept going, and I was like, I'm sorry, like that's such a red flag for me that everything else you said is now moot. Like I can't justify the level of risk you just presented me, and I'm appreciative that you were that transparent because now I know I'm not really interested in pursuing this. You could be the most amazing tester, but we have a pillar which is like teams are stronger than heroes, and it's specifically basically don't hire assholes, and you just showed that. And I was like, I'm sorry. Like you could have talked about the process. You could have talked about, hey, we're all struggling. We're all doing our best. But instead you like found time to criticize someone in a way that's really unhealthy. And I'm just, thank you for the honesty because now we're done.
That's just so close. You just like,
I had so many situations like that when somebody was doing so great and they basically always say one thing or one word and it nullifies the whole interview. And I'm like, well, I'm gonna just sit there and wait out until, and then go to HR and say, or the recruiter, and be like, send them a general response.
All right, friends. I think we've had an excellent conversation today. We've hit all sorts of points with not only like what hiring managers tend to be looking for, but also like some questions you're probably going to get, some questions that you should actually ask the interview panels, and just kind of think of what kind of ways you can prep for an interview and hopefully succeed. So I just want to thank everybody for joining. Thank you so much. So before we completely close out, I want to go over our bug of the cast, which Leland has one he would like to share with us.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I joined Bungie in the first place was because of Randall Glass's Warthog jump videos, where they were like using the physics engine to blow up a vehicle all across like an island and mess. And so when I was testing early on Destiny 1, I was like, oh, I love this Sparrow. You can do barrel rolls. But I also know that they're still using Havoc's physics engine. I wonder if I can like do some weird stuff. And so I jumped out of the Sparrow while it was in the middle of a barrel roll and found that you inherit the physics of the barrel roll itself and the speed that it is moving, and then it passed it on to the player. So I could throw myself across like hundreds and hundreds of meters of the level and like land right at the boss and immediately start fighting. It's like, wow, you're completing this strike in like a tenth of the time. That's impressive. We're like, oh, you're landing on drop ships. What's happening? And unfortunately, they did fix it, which is like, I was like, no. It was one of those dilemmas where I was like, should I file this? Because it's really fun.
Yeah. Think of the speedrunning community, Leland.
Exactly.
Think
I was
of
like,
the harm you did
I'm
them.
crushing hearts right now.
Do I want the job or want the...
Yeah. Exactly. Oh my gosh.
Does that loop back to an interview question? It's like, are you okay with just breaking the hearts of the speedrunning community?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Can you sleep at night?
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. I love that it keeps the speed too, so you just
Yes.
like shoot yourself
It was
across.
amazing. A little nauseating actually, but really amazing.
Oh, that's so funny. Well, I appreciate. Thanks for sharing that, Leland.
For sure.
Okay, friends, that's it for us for today. I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank Ariel and Leland and Marcin for joining the podcast. I want to thank Sarah for being our
Thank you, Sarah.
producer in the background and doing socials and chatting in the chat. So thank you so much. So we also want to thank our audience for listening and joining in on Twitch and chatting with us as we go. We wouldn't be doing this podcast without you. So if you have any, because we can't do this without you. If you have any suggestions for future podcasts or topics or bugs of the day, we'd love to hear from you. If you are a QA professional and would like to be on the podcast, we'd love to have you. For example, Marcin and Leland. Thank you, gentlemen. So in either case, please contact us at undergroundgameqaconf@gmail.com or reach out on Twitter at undergroundqa because we'd love to hear from you and collaborate. So the last bit, we'll do some plugs. Ariel, you have a couple.
So the first thing I wanted to plug is Women Who Code. For those of you who aren't familiar, they are a great nonprofit group that try to support women in tech, and they do lots of awesome meetups and game jams and other cool events. So I'm going to throw their website here in the chat. Highly recommend checking them out because contrary to what you might hear on Twitter, women do in fact code.
Oh, thank you, Ariel. Leland, do you have anything?
Yeah, I think I would just plug that we're hiring a lot of these exact kind of positions right now at Bungie. So like our entry level is called associate tester. So if anything today interested you, or if you feel like you're uniquely qualified for it, like please by all means come work for us. We'd love it.
All right, thank you. And Marcin?
I'm a very boring person, so I'm going to use the opportunity of having two Bungie people, and I'm going to plug my friend Twitch stream. So Ayanozaur, she's a Destiny streamer, and she's an awesome producer in game dev. So please check her out. It's Ayanozaur at twitch.tv. So she's awesome. So go watch her.
Oh, that's excellent. Great plug.
Love it.
All right, I'm going to plug a couple Underground Game QA Discord channels. So if you're not in our Discord, please jump into our Discord. There should be a link in our Twitter. But the Underground Game QA Opportunities channel, where a lot of people who are in that community, which is how many? What are we at? Like 160? Like there's so many people in this. There's 100 isn't even right. There's a lot of people in this Discord now, but a lot of them are posting job opportunities regular in the opportunities channel on our Discord. So please, 350. Thank you, Chelsea. We got swole. There are lots of people. Seriously, but a lot of people are sharing job opportunities, QA job opportunities in the industry all over the world in the opportunities channel. And then, like I said at the top of the episode, the resume review channel, where people are asking for a resume and cover letter help, and a lot of us and the professionals in the group are helping support everyone in the community. So please join our Discord and please jump into those channels.
Ooh, Chris, one thing I would ask there too is like, if you have any follow-up questions specifically for us, you're welcome to just tag us in that Discord server and be like, I was really interested about this thing you said here, or I didn't understand this part. Could you follow up? I'd love to be able to contribute in that way. And I kind of just volunteered the other. So.
Oh, thanks. No, that's great.
Thanks,
no,
Leland.
that's an excellent. That's actually an excellent
It's
point.
about collaboration.
He does this to me at work too.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. You know who's great at this? Ariel. She's not in this meeting, so I can say this.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Yes, definitely tag anyone in the episode, and we'll happy to chat with you more. All right, and with that, I think we're done for this week. Thank you, everyone. Just a reminder to keep playing, keep testing, and please keep washing your hands. Stay safe, friends. Take care of yourselves.